All right, greetings everybody. Robin here from Courage is the Cure. Welcome to episode 138 of Relentless. Today we're going to be joined by Jim McMurtry in Canada. Looking forward to this conversation. I'll see you all in a jiffy.
Relentless in our fields, we hunt the hidden flaw. Masters of the craft, we shatter systems' walls. Relentless, stay relentless. We shift the tide, expose the light, turn dark to light. We never hide. Relentless. Relentless.
All right, everybody, like I said, welcome to episode 138 of Relentless. It is the 11th of February 2026. Today we're going to be joined once again on Relentless with Jim McMurtry, and we spoke to Jim, when was it? 24th of October 2024, so about a year and a half ago. If anybody wants to see that first episode, go along to Courage's Cure on Rumble. It's episode 78 and it's called Where Are the Bodies? Before we bring Jim on, I just want to play a video in case you missed that conversation. Let's catch you up very quickly. Jim is a mountain of wonderful things. Most notably, a former teacher who refuses to be cancelled for wrong speech and wrong think. So let's catch you up on Jim's story. Here we go, everybody. Here's a short video.
Hi, I'm Jim McMurtry. I'm that teacher who was walked out of classroom and career almost 3 years ago for telling the truth about what happened with the discovery of 215 child remains in Kamloops.
There's a developing story out of British Columbia. A First Nation says the remains of more than 200 children have been located, buried on the site of a former residential school. In fact, the largest residential school in the entire national network from the time.
3 years ago, I was in a classroom and students were talking about Christian teachers murdering 215 children at one residential school in Kamloops and elsewhere. I said the wrong thing. Within a half hour, I was led out of classroom and career. So that was 3 years ago. I just would love viewers and for others, starting with you, to appreciate how humiliating it is for a teacher at the end of one's career to be let out in front of one's students. All I said was that it was my understanding that those children who died while in attendance at residential school did so from disease, sometimes accidents and fires, but mostly disease such as tuberculosis. There haven't been any graves found. I think most people know that now.
And to this day, they're saying there's the number keeps inflating, but there's tens of thousands of missing and murdered, Indigenous children in Canada. They haven't found a single case of a missing child, a single case of a murdered child in any schools. And, teachers generally don't murder their children. It's not good for one's reputation.
I think the most important thing is to be informed and to present the material that one has, ideally establish facts to students, to see those facts from a number of different perspectives. I think that a teacher's responsibility is to present as historical content as fairly as possible from a variety of perspectives and leave children to make up their own minds, to come to their own conclusions. And so I'm hopefully going to win in some way, at least win vindication. And I'm very appreciative of all those who have supported me, and I'm hoping that I can be an influence in other teachers to just say no, that you're not going to fold, you're not going to go back on your principles. The other side is wrong. It's absolutely appalling that we're indoctrinating children not just with Indigenous issues, but with race and gender, and with censorship of literature, with falsification of history, with lowering academic standards and so forth. I think it's time that teachers just say, we've had enough. We're not going to wander any further from the core academic values that have guided us until this time. Thank you.
All right, everybody. So that is a quick catch up. If you missed my first conversation with Jim, and it's actually nearly 5 years ago now that Jim was walked out of his classroom, if I'm not mistaken, on the 31st of May 2021. Let me welcome Jim once again to Relentless. My great pleasure. How are you, Jim?
I'm wonderful, Robin. Great to be here.
Thank you for joining me again. What has changed for you, the media storm, and do you have an update on that situation?
Well, I think the most important update, and there are obviously lots of similarities between what's happening in Canada and Australia, the false announcement that spread around the world of 215 children found dead in a mass grave was false and apocryphal, and most people know that right now. But that was used by the government, media, and all sorts of other people who have something to gain, maybe simply as virtue signalers or maybe to some sort of global conspiracy. I have no idea. But they used it to try and get at people's fundamental rights. So they fired me for saying something that was against established truth, that no child was murdered in any of the schools that were for Native, Indian, or Indigenous children. But what's fascinating right now is the government in British Columbia, the province where I live in the western part of Canada, but this is true all across Canada, they're giving large swaths of land over to the Indigenous, who represent less than 5% of the population, and most of them are mixed ancestry. So, I mean, there's very few pure-blooded people. And they're getting large chunks of, particularly in British Columbia, of the province. And people are waking up and told that their property is no longer theirs. An Indigenous title is senior to any other title. And the British Columbia government, run by a communist named David Eby, is saying that every inch of the province is Indigenous land. So the most fundamental thing for many of us, of course, is our property, is what we have in the form of wealth or assets, which we hope to live off in old age and pass on to children. So it's as though everybody woke up in Canada and realized that we don't own anything. We are, as you said in the introduction, we are being described by many people in government, and certainly in Indigenous circles, as uninvited guests, that we are interlopers, that we're trespassers, that we are criminals. And yet, of course, Canada was this huge mass of land like Australia that had nothing on it. There were no roads, there were no hospitals, schools, there was nothing. And to assume that all of a sudden everything now belongs to the people who for tens of thousands of years didn't create any infrastructure, anything of permanence. They didn't have concrete wheel, they didn't have literacy, numeracy, all sorts of things. And so I don't understand it. Canada has done so much to lift all minorities that struggle. It works so hard to be a decent country. And now it's all being turned in on us. It's as though a small group of elitists and using, I think in many cases, Indigenous people to deprive people of all that's fundamental to their own reproduction, to their own life. Again, not owning anything, because somebody sitting in front of a TV or sitting drinking a beer on a reservation somewhere in Canada, all of a sudden owns everything. It's an absolutely shocking thing. And I would love to see, as a former teacher, I'd love to see everybody do well. And I never wanted to see children based on ancestry or judged in that way. But this is what we have to fight, as you know. We have to be relentless against this woke nightmare that's visited all Western countries.
I noticed, I'm not sure when the video was for, but there's a video on your X page. I'll just put your X handle on the bottom of the screen. It's also in the description for anybody. Please go along and follow Jim on X. A video titled, is it Can You Dig It, or Jim's still digging it.
I would love it if you
because
showed a clip of that. I think people might find it funny. Well, that's the
yeah,
interesting thing. Nobody, I would love it if you did. Nobody in Canada has gone and dug because they don't want to. This is 5 years ago. They don't want to, they don't want the truth. They want to claim, they want an original sin for all the Europeans that settled Canada. They want us to be presented as mass murders, and these were schools where there were Christian nuns and priests. They want to defame all those dead people. And of course, if you dug and there's no buried children, then it would all end, but they're not going to do that. It's just they've worked harder to maintain this cloak of secrecy over their hoax than they did even in creating the hoax in the first place. But I think it's really awful when governments lie to people. It's like the burning of the Reichstag in Germany that helped precipitate the Second World War.
I've got well, it's part of the falsification of history, isn't it? So we've got post from February 9th. Well, you've shared it, so it's originally from December 6, 2024. Jim Can Dig It. Let's watch this, everybody. Here we go.
There's a developing story out of British Columbia. A First Nation says the remains of more than 200 children have been located, buried on the site of a former residential school. In fact, the largest residential school in the entire national network from the time.
3 years later.
Can you dig it? Can you dig it? Can you dig it?
Hey, Jim, what are you doing?
I'm still f***ing digging because nobody else in Canada will.
Legend speaks of unturned brows. A curse
I found
so
something.
deep it won't be found.
Oh no, another tree root.
But Jim steps in with strength and will. He digs the truth, silence still. Jim can
Hey, Jim, find
dig it.
anything yet?
Jim can
No,
dig
I'm
it.
still f***ing digging.
Jim can dig it. Jim can dig it. Can you dig it?
So let's be clear for the audience. They still haven't found any of these bodies that they claimed were.
But that's the fascinating thing is that they started off with this one school, 215 child remains discovered in a mass grave, and they won't let anyone anywhere near. The government is participating with a local band to make sure there can be no drones over top. There's a big fence all around it. They're not going to dig. They're going to preserve this life. But at the time, they were also saying, well, that's not just at this school. There are children that were murdered and buried. Children put on hooks that were incinerated, impregnated, and the babies were put in incinerators. And John, I mean, all these horrible stories. And there was a commission into this that talked about physical and biological across Canada, physical and biological as well as cultural genocide. Canada voted itself a genocidal state the next year in 2022. All this hype about how terrible Canada is. So the people who are in charge of Canada at the time could all of a sudden said it's going to be better under us. We're going to completely smear everyone before us and then all of a sudden fix the problem. It's very easy. The easiest way to, of course, make one feel a little bit better about oneself is to put down everybody else. And that's, it's sort of a strange thing. I can't really understand it psychologically. Those are, I'm just attempting here to explain, but it's just it's a mass cover up. They did dig in some places. They didn't find anything, but they won't dig here. And this is the epicenter of this hoax again, that Canada has an original sin being genocidal toward Indigenous people, which is why Indigenous people should take the land. Now, the fascinating thing is where Indigenous people have been given land, like near where I live, the Indigenous people quickly sell it out to the Chinese. And because they don't have the means to run a sophisticated, technologically advanced society or mini society. So where I live, it's all huge international corporations like Amazon and Walmart. But the biggest of all is that the shopping mall on the reserve and big housing development. And the Chinese purchased that years ago. So my point is, you're not even doing anything for the Indigenous people. They're dying from drugs like fentanyl at 10 times the rate and non-Indigenous children. There is nothing good about what's being done here for Indigenous people. It's never a good idea to lie to people. And so what I'm hoping, you're very kindly, you've got in your little title there, the teacher who wouldn't bow. Well, I wasn't really given a choice because I didn't know what else to do, because I didn't want this evil lie to continue, this defamation of the dead. So I stood up, hoping that people would come to their senses and would give me my job back. And I recognize now that I'll never get my job back. But I think in some ways, I'm still teaching. I mean, I'm doing something that might be more important. And what an honor to have this opportunity to talk to people in Australia. And what I want to say here, it's never a good idea to create separate rights, separate status for people on the basis of ancestry or birth characteristics or race. I mean, it's just iniquitous, an obscenity. And it goes against Martin Luther King and judging people on things other than, this. And we know that's not the world that many Western countries are living in. And I think it's going to ultimately become incredibly destructive to us all. So the moment people start lying about history, it becomes very Orwellian. You know that they're just trying to manipulate people. You know it's never a good thing. But more importantly, from the perspective as an educator, is I don't have a right to do anything but to present the past. And as I said in that little video, the students come to their own conclusions. And so it's not only a violation morally and legally, it's a violation educationally, that we have a generation of students in Canada now from kindergarten, grade 12, and many of them are in their 30s now, who are believing that Canada, again, is a genocidal state. And the opposite is true. I mean, these kids had no education, had no schools. They didn't live long. Terrible hunger and abuse and despair on these reserves. And Canada comes in and provides them a schooling. Only a minority went away to residential schools. Most are boarding schools. Most of them were schooled, near to their reserve. But it wasn't possible for all kids in far-flung areas. There was nothing in any way that was genocidal or even ill-intentioned. So this is a tremendous warning to the world that people can't lose their faculties, their ability to critically and independently think about the information that's being presented to them.
It's we often talk about people in the audience. I'm sure people that you speak to, I know most definitely people I speak to, these awful, disgusting creatures that don't show their faces, the three-letter agencies, the bureaucrats, the politicians. We often hear this phrase, never pass up a good opportunity. And it's usually in reference to something that, has just happened in the recent past, right? Or they know it's going to happen in the future and they kind of plan for it, right? But it also occurs, I would suggest, historically in this sort of context, because the opportunity here with the residential schools and the falsification of the dead children is multifaceted. I mean, you can talk about, you've just talked about real estate, multinational companies, this, the whole indoctrination of nationalism, and you've talked about the defamation of the dead. There's so many parts here that is a great opportunity for indoctrination and pivoting, especially the youth and the younger generation, towards another narrative to take them into the future. It's not just things that happens now, it's also historically they can create this. I mean, no wonder they don't want people flying drones over that area and don't want to dig it up, because then they're narrative might possibly be exposed. Jim, you said you were still teaching now, and I would most definitely agree with you. And in May last year, your book came out. I'm just going to pop it up on the screen for everybody. The Scarlet Lesson, and that's your website there. Tell us about your book.
I feel honored to do that. If I could just make one quick reference to my going and digging up, looking for the graves, because nobody in Canada has. Of course, that was a spoof. You can't get anywhere near, that reserve where, the sacred land is, where these reserves, they have, in addition to drones and barbed wire fence, everything. They also have 24-hour security. And so after I did that, almost a year later, this past summer, I thought, I'm going to try it for real. And I went with a camera crew, and I went up and to see if I could actually get on there. And I wasn't going to dig, although at the time I wasn't sure what I was going to do, because I've been quite affected, to lose my career over this. And but anywhere I got anywhere near the reserve and the sacred land, ground, and I had 3 people come at me, and then the police were called and so forth. And I was doing nothing that was problematic or whatever. So you say in the song that leads up, you talk about fear. Mm-hmm. But the reality is you have to be fearful, because you don't only lose your career. I've tried so many things to try and vindicate myself. And I'll come back to the book in a second here. One of them is to go to universities and go to schools. I know you're going to talk about the university in a moment, going and the reception, just trying to get people to understand that what we're trying to do here, because I joined with some others, and particularly a fired professor, is to let people know that they're being fed lies about the past, and that's it. I mean, they're being brainwashed. And if you understand a lot, I know you would, about National Socialism in 1930s Germany, it wasn't just the Jews and the Gypsies and the Catholics and the handicapped and others that were exterminated. Anybody who didn't subscribe 100% to National Socialism and to the obviously elevation of Hitler into some sort of deity, they could be killed. I mean, there were all sorts of ordinary Germans who stood up to National Socialism, who were destroyed, who were executed, shot, hanged. I mean, you don't want totalitarianism. So what's underlying all this, it's not so much my case that I'm after. I'm just saying that nobody should have total control of a society. Even if I were wrong, it's important that I would have a voice. So my book was just one of, I wrote articles. I've been on X for a couple of years. I've done all sorts of things. Again, tours. I've done all sorts of things. My book, was obviously tried to, in an intellectual and an engaging way, talk about my family, talk about the fact that my father was a chief justice and somebody who was a leader in Canada, and how deeply disturbed he was by what was happening in Canada, where they took down our statues of people of the past, where they burned Christian churches, over 100. I mean, they were and vandalized another 100. So my book is just detailing the story of what Canada, became shortly after this discovery. But of course, it's this whole postmodernism, political correctness, deconstructionism, really destruction. It's been with us for decades. But it peaked. Maybe it peaked in 2021, because I know people are moving away from it. And so my story, I use the Scarlet Lesson because they've scarred me for life. I'll never be able to get work as a teacher again, because in a regular public school or private school, because I'm like, as you know, Hector Printed and the Scarlet Letter, I've done something that I can't get away. And in her case, it was adultery. In my case, it was saying something that, that was obviously unorthodox, because and that's all. It was true and established, and established fact and so forth, but it was just something. You look at Salem with the witches, look at the satanic panic in the 80s, look at COVID and the excessive, what the state was doing and turning off water fountains in schools. So little kids are going, what do I do for water? I mean, banning my grandsons from even going to park when nobody was around, and going after and arresting and fining people. And we had a trucker convoy in Canada. And you have to be always on guard against, as Lord Acton said, power corrupts and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. So people need to exercise their fundamental rights. And what I'm doing right now is obviously I'm not making any money doing this, but I think I have long ago won vindication. I think that the whole country knows that none of this is true, and that we need to stop the brainwashing of our children. And the worst, of course, has nothing to do with indigenization or the race. The worst thing that they've done in schools in Canada, but elsewhere, is that they've taken little kids, including my grandsons, in age 5, asking what their pronouns are, and leading them down a path where they're to tell adults what their sexuality is, what their preferences are, and to consider whether they're in the wrong body. All this before they get out of primary school.
I just want to show you something, Jim, and this popped up on my Facebook feed 10 minutes before I joined you this morning. I thought, I have to show Jim this. And so I'll have to screen the share. Everybody knows it's not a good episode without screening the share. This popped up this morning, and it's a post from one of our parliamentarians from the ruling party, the Labor Party, the Communist Party, my conspiracy allegedly here in Australia, and Magenta Marshall, member for Rockingham, that's in my state here in Western Australia. She's got up there a big green tick, commitment delivered. The school leaders there, I'd suggest they're probably in year 6, standing around a circle of concrete with Indigenous gentlemen there doing a smoking ceremony. And the text reads, Rockingham Beach Primary School, $50,000 delivered for Wunja meeting place. Now, you just mentioned concrete, Jim, at the start of the show, and talking about infrastructure and all these sorts of things when you're talking about land rights and so on and so forth. I mean, people have commented here on Facebook, they didn't have concrete, 60,000 years ago, if you believe it was 60,000 years ago, like they tell us. But what's more abhorrent, Jim, is the virtue signalling from our supposed elected leaders who do this, and the children made to stand there. And what is happening there, I would suggest, is this continuation of white bashing and white guilt, and this colonizer narrative, or as Dallas Brody in Canada said, uninvited guests, if we want to use newspeak. This kind of virtue signalling from our so-called elected leaders, I find is so disgusting, Jim.
I love listening to you, and I could listen to you for a lot longer, Robin. But if you want my point, one of the things that they're doing here, of course, is they're investing wisdom, or implicating there's wisdom in these elders, and not in anybody else. I mean, that they are the chosen people, that they are somehow like the oracles of Delphi, that they've got some sort of spiritual intelligence that nobody else has. Well, the problem with that is, in Canada, is the Indigenous people, and they all got on this bandwagon, claim that there were over 25,000 murdered and missing Indigenous children. 25,000, and some are saying, and maybe a lot more, maybe hundreds of thousands. And they had a commission, as I made reference to earlier, called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Nothing to do with truth and nothing to do with reconciliation. And they went across the country for 6 years, and they heard all sorts of positive things about these schools and about how Indigenous people were treated. But of course, they only cared about the negative. And they wrote a report. The people in charge of the report were Indigenous. And they started off this was in 2015, this idea of, again, physical, biological, and cultural genocide. And so these stories, these ghost stories and urban legends about European or white people going around killing Indigenous people, like the blood libels against Jews long ago, sacrificing their children, that's reified. That's been reinvented here. I think it's absolutely awful that you're assuming that one group of people have, again, insight that others don't have. And you're talking about smudging or using smoke. Nobody else is allowed to practice their religion, whether it's pagan or monotheistic or whatever. Nobody else is allowed to in a school. So they're making all sorts of exceptions. They're creating two classes of citizens. And then, of course, as you pointed out, all the historical anachronisms. And they have things like, they talk about the Indigenous people here. Most of the things they talk about as being theirs has nothing to do with them. The most obvious is the written language. All sorts of place names in Canada are being changed with Indigenous names. They didn't have a writing system, so they're using these crazy Roman Latin letters with these accents and little numbers and all sorts of things that no Indigenous person has a clue. These are linguistic notations drummed up by eggheads in universities in the 80s and 90s, and now they're walking around saying this is our language. And I mean, I think the deeper you go into this, you're only going to embarrass Indigenous people. Why don't we just stop all this and simply say that an Australian is an Australian is an Australian, and we're going to do our best to build a better tomorrow. There's no good in taking Indigenous children, turning their heads to the past, and then filling them with lies of atrocities toward them when they were people that didn't know when their next meal was from, that they dug in the ground or hoped that there was an animal they could get with some primitive stone weapon, or they, tried desperately with a bone hook to catch fish. They've been moved into this 21st century of tremendous luxury and privilege. And all we're doing is telling them how bad everything is. And they're even using the word decolonialism in Canada. Maybe that's being used there, as though we should undo it all. Well, that's very communistic. It's this idea that you destroy everything that's being built up, and somehow these people who are hunter-gatherers are going to build up something overnight that's better than everything here, better than smartphones and better than medical technology. And I mean, it's just absolute absurdities. But again, coming back to fear, most teachers in Canada, of course, think like I do and speak like I do, but everyone's afraid. The same with lawyers, doctors and nurses. I went to hospital twice recently to get an artificial hip. And both times when I went for blood, I was asked if I was pregnant.
What? Stop it.
This is how wokeism goes. It invades absolutely everything. It invades math classes in schools. It invades, courtrooms where they're no longer, using a Bible or symbolizing truth or putting their hands on, on a feather. I mean, it's just absolutely everywhere, and nobody's questioning any of it. And the worst for me is when they're bringing secondhand smoke into schools. I mean, it's really, this is not a good thing. Secondhand smoke is not good for children. And neither is lying to children about the past. If you're telling children there's tens of thousands of murdered Indigenous and still missing, secretly buried, we're not even telling you. Oh, and another one. We do these land acknowledgements you mentioned. We say we're on stolen land or unceded land, but we're not going to give it back to you. We're never going to do that. It's your land, but it's ours. I mean, I stole your bike, but you're never going to see it again. I mean, this is really cruel. It's not just insane. It is cruelty toward Indigenous people. So people like me and you and maybe, might get, we're racist or we're Eurocentric or we're whatever. No, it's the opposite. Everybody wants truth. Every Indigenous child wants to be able to go to a grocery store to buy food and a pharmacy to get medicine and be able to turn on the TV at night and watch a good show. Like they don't want to go sit in a tent. So the problem here is fear. Teachers know, like all other professionals, if you speak out, you're going to be punished and likely you're going to lose everything. And so what we need is enough people just to be daring. And I know many people can't, but a guy like me who's on, in his late 60s, I as a teacher, I was 60 at the time, but I'm almost 67 now. That's how long it's been going on for. But I guess 62 when that particular instance happened, about again about these kids in a mass grave. But what we need to do as older people who don't have much to, who can survive without, this freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose, the Joni Mitchell song.
Mhm.
People who don't have much to lose, we need to be relentless. That is, it's forget about fear. Yeah, forget the fear. Let's go to the positive. We need to be courageous, which I can look on your screen right now. We need to be relentless. And people may not think I'm anybody, and I don't care. But the one thing that no one will deny is there's nowhere I won't go, and there's nowhere where I won't open my mouth and challenge people who are lying to kids. I ran politically at the provincial level, state level, and at the federal level, just so I could be walking out of land acknowledgements in front of cameras. I'm going to universities. I've been assaulted. I've been, knocked to the ground. All sorts of things. But I am not giving up. I'm going against my union, my regulatory body, my employer. I'm going against my governments. I'm doing everything I can. And all I'm finding is there are more and more people who are lining up behind me saying, it's all wrong. We know that Canadians should be able to come to their own conclusions again about the past, and that you shouldn't be able to cast aspersions, bear false witness against dead Christian men and women who worked with Indigenous people for 400 years in Canada and see them all as horrible people. It's just so morally wrong.
You mentioned walking out there in a land acknowledgement. I just want to show people, because I think sometimes we get desensitized to people's courageousness to do things like this, because it does take a certain level of testicular fortitude, let's put it that way, to do something like this. So I'm just going to pop it up on the screen for everybody to have a look.
And take a stand when they say we live on stolen land.
I just walked out of a federal election all candidates meeting because there was a land acknowledgement, which is such empty virtual signaling. Is it not our land? And if so, why don't we leave? Well, why don't we just go somewhere else? All of us, all Canadians, why don't we just leave?
Walk out. Before we begin though, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that we're speaking today on the unceded traditional territories of the Matsquik, Kwantlen, Katzie, Consembia First Nation. I would also like to thank the President.
I hope everybody understands that a land acknowledgement is not just compelled speech. It's lip service. Nobody is going to leave Canada. Nobody is going to say that 5% of the population is going to have all the rights and all the land. So it just needs to end. Just don't do it. Walk out.
Fantastic, Jim. I wonder what your thoughts are about the, what could we say, tokenisation of Indigenous children, because, I speak to a lot of people, and I've spoken to a lot of parents with their children in primary school all around Australia, and the welcome to country that they have at school assemblies, and a reoccurring conversation I have is that the welcome to country at the school assembly is conducted by the Indigenous child or one of the Indigenous children that are at the school. Now, I wonder what those children are going to think when they grow up and realize that they have been used by the school to stand up in front of a huge cohort of their peers, and used in such a way to propagate this ideology throughout the education system, how this will impact not only those children but Indigenous children at large, because they're being tokenised, I'd suggest.
Well, absolutely, and they're museum pieces as well, because they're all supposed to talk about their culture in the past, as though they still, rub two sticks together to make a fire. And I mean, it's just not in their interest at all. I think a lot of them would be embarrassed. My concern is more with the non-Indigenous kids in the classroom, because one group of kids based on race are being privileged, are giving opportunities that nobody else is. So, and of course, Indigenous children have a role to play. Everybody has interest in cultural stories. And so there's nothing wrong with an Indigenous child being called to the front of the classroom. But the next day, it should be somebody else. I mean, every kid in the classroom should talk about his or her past and families and things from the past and things for the future. I mean, I just don't understand how we can build democracy, which is one person, one vote, and then go away from that, renounce it all, and say all of a sudden that we're creating this special class of mystical people who are alone, are anointed and chosen to lead us into the future. The people who have historically contributed the least to modernity. I mean, it's just absolute absurdity. I think you're embarrassing them. I just think the tokenism is an awful thing. It's paternalism. It's you're every time you have a special program, every time you have scholarships only for Indigenous kids, every time you say, 8% of the lawyers or the doctors have to be Indigenous, every time you create all these easy paths for them and everybody else, you're not helping them. You're making everybody, first of all, feel a little bit of animus toward them. But you're not helping the society. I mean, you don't want someone to be a doctor who's not fully qualified. One of my daughters gave birth today. I mean, the idea that meritocracy is no longer important in choosing people that are doing work that's life and death, in its implications. It's just absolutely absurd. But one last thing is, in the school system in Canada and the university is saying they have all these things for Indigenous people. They don't need to get into law school, for example. But it goes, they don't have the same grades. They don't have to do the intelligence tests to get in. They don't have to have a degree and all this kind of stuff. And so the interesting thing about it is, for me, is you're creating a system where you're saying we're helping these people. But what you're really doing is you're telling everybody that they're not capable of making it on their own. I mean, that's the most racist thing of all. That if people are going around and saying to me that old white guys like me need to, I don't know, throwing a football out in the street or playing ball hockey, I don't know, or doing a crossword puzzle, I needed to give a head start to everybody else because I'm an old white person. I wouldn't react nicely to that person. I would say to that person, I'm going to beat you. And I'm going to show you that never open your mouth again and to doubt old white men. In the same way, we should not doubt young Indigenous youth, that they can't, given the same opportunities and the same whatever, the same beautiful society to grow up in, like in Australia, that they can't make it as well. And it doesn't mean that they need to be equally represented in certain professional or chattering classes. It means that they should have the opportunities, like everybody else, to succeed and live the life that they want. And the moment you start saying everybody else, has to line up on the 100-meter dash, 10 yards back so they can have a head start. I mean, it's just saying to everybody, you're not as fast, you're not as smart, you're not as capable. I think the racist people are the leftist lunatics who brought in this woke ideology. And one last thing, if I may say, about National Socialism. National Socialism in pre-war Germany destroyed, again, anybody who thought for him or herself. There are so many Indigenous people, just like there were German people, there are so many who don't go along with this, who think it's absolutely absurd to make them history's victims, to make them like this, like they need to be in an emotional rubber room, that they're all emotional hemophiliacs. And if you use the wrong word to describe them, they're going to melt. No, these were brave people that learned how to live with very little in a really rugged landscape. Give them some credit, for Christ's sake. They're just as capable as anybody else. You can't run a classroom or a society if you don't have respect for everybody in it.
Right. Oh, I have to agree. 2 episodes, I think, episode 136, I interviewed Ursula Edgington in New Zealand, and she's a educational psychologist and has a very interesting background as far as education is concerned, and adult education. So just thinking about universities, because we were talking about, is academia broken? So, we had conversations around all of those sorts of things. But, just as I do when I have any guest on, I go and stalk that person online. So I've been having a good rummage through your X page. And there was a recent video up there that you shared from Frances Widdowson at a university campus in Canada. I do have it here to play, but before we do that, can you introduce the video for us and what's going on there, and why she's there, all that sort of thing?
Well, Frances and I have known each other for a number of years. I was fired as a high school history teacher. She was fired as a university professor in the area of social science. And so lately we've decided that we're going to go into university campuses and with signs, just small little signs, and we're going to try and engage students because they don't have a clue. They don't have a clue about our history. Honestly, it's just absolutely shocking. They can't imagine that there's something wrong with sexualizing little children or telling them they're in the wrong body. There's something wrong with telling kids that the race is going to define them for the rest of their life, their skin color, or anyhow. But in this particular case, start with the idea that there are no murdered or missing Indigenous children under the aegis of Canadian government in schools back in the past. Let's just start there. So, and the students come up and right away they start, their whistles and drums and megaphones, and we can't say anything. And then the assaults start, and then police are called. And usually it's one of us that's arrested. And Frances tends to be the fall person because she doesn't have children. I have children who'd be mortified if I was ever arrested. And they carry her away, and then it gets worse. And the police ended up, the last time I was with Frances at the big university in Vancouver called University of British Columbia, our group all had to be put first in a building for a couple of hours because there was a mob outside of 1,000 wanting to get in on us. They had to lock the door and then block it. And then we had to be taken out in a bus surrounded by police officers. And most of us are seniors who are academics. I myself, I studied, I did a PhD, but I studied under our prime minister's father. Our prime minister is Mark Carney under his father. I'm a legitimate person, and I've written many books and so forth to tell a 20-year-old that they've got it wrong about Canada's past, that Christian men and women did not put little children on hooks or in incinerators. That's, it was just sort of basic. And and it's really hard to do. So as you'll see, the students aren't in the appetite to entertain an opposing view. They've been as brainwashed as Hitler's brown shirts. I mean, there's no way of reasoning with them.
So the lady that you'll see at the center of the video here is Frances, the lady you were just talking about there, Jim. I'll just pop it up on the stage for everybody. And let's just be clear. These university students, I don't even think circling is the correct verb. Circling Frances here because they are incapable of having a conversation or listening, or just moving along, maybe.
There's a lot of tape. So this was not a big university. This is a small university in another province that Frances went by herself last week. And so she didn't go with a group of people. She was quickly surrounded. The police surrounded her. They refused to. She's saying, I can't hear, I can't talk, that they're blowing whistles and right in her ear and all the other music and noise. And the police are doing nothing, even though, of course, the sound like that is assault. But what it carries on to, what you're not seeing here is the man with her back to us is her husband, and he's a senior, and he was knocked to the ground and bloodied. And that I didn't show that part in this particular clip. And Frances went down on the ground as well, and she had the bag that she has in her arms taken from her. I mean, it was physical assault, and there's so many. So I don't put everything to do with violence because I don't want to be someone who's trying to. The point is that you have an academic who's one of Canada's leading scholars on Indigenous history and culture, not being given an opportunity to, when she goes to university, and then she gets arrested, and there she was arrested as well. And so I mean, it's just absolutely shocking how universities have become part of this totalitarian woke program of there only being one view, and not a marketplace ideas, a market of only one idea.
When I see footage like that, I automatically think of Yuri Bezmenov. Used to be part of the KGB, and 30 or 40 years ago he did an interview, maybe 40 years ago, did an interview about ideological subversion, and he went through the stages of it and how long they need. Usually it's one generation to affect the thinking of that generation. So it's about 10, 15 years. And when I see footage like that, all I can think of is, well, ideological subversion is real, and it's working. We can see it throughout all of the Five Iron Nations at the very bare minimum at the moment. Thinking about and it covers a range of issues, whether you're talking about, Canada's false history, or you're talking about telling young people that there's 200 and however many different genders and all this sort of stuff. It covers so many things where and trying to challenge those kind of, which are now institutional narratives, through that ideological subversion. How do you see the future for, we've talked about primary schools, we're touching on universities now. How do you see the future for challenging and shifting that problem with the content of speech and the narratives that have been created, to shifting it around so that people are able to use their brain cells again and aren't subverted. I mean, this is a huge problem.
Yeah, one thing we haven't touched on is literature. So when I was a kid in school, I wasn't particularly excited about what I was learning. I wasn't a great student until I got into English class. And I just absolutely loved To Kill a Mockingbird, The Inheritors, or Lord of the Flies as well, William Golding. I mean, there's so many younger kids, Holes, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, just so much great literature, and it transported me, and it just made school something that I wanted to go to. And they're getting rid of literature. They're getting rid of anything that's getting people to think. And they're replacing it with this woke dross where, European whites are, tease some kid and the kid triumphs over it, some minority child. I mean, there's nothing that's making it better. But Canada is 10 provinces and 3 territories. Two of the territories, there's separatist movements. Quebec has had one for a long time. And now you have one in the Western provinces, but Manitoba, particularly in Saskatchewan, even more so in Alberta, and now in British Columbia where I live. So what they're trying to do, this deconstructionism, postmodernism, is going to, first of all, it's going to destroy the West. It's going to destroy countries. It's going to implode them. They're going to break up into small parts. And then they are not going to be strong enough to fight the totalitarian systems out there. The Russias and the Chinas and the North Koreas and all these other places where you can't think for yourself. I mean, it's going to be like Nazi Germany, where everybody has to be in the same parade or dead. And so do I have hope? Absolutely. Because I know there are a ton of Canadians. I don't think Trump's recently threatened Canada to take it over. What I don't think he recognizes, we might not be as tough as Australians. Oh my gosh. Australian people are so incredible, but Canadians are similar. I think anybody who tried to invade Canada or take Canada over wouldn't get very far. I think Canadian men and women would hit them so hard on the head with hockey sticks and anything else they could pick up, they'd leave the country in a hurry. If anybody thinks Canadians are weak or Australians, they just haven't been tested. What the problem is right now is people are being fooled. They think it's just these little things, a little bit of land here, or a little bit of acknowledgement there, or a little bit of scholarships only for these kids, or access to special programs only for that group. I mean, when it becomes more apparent, and one of the biggest island in British Columbia was just given over, it's called the Queen Charlotte Islands, a number of islands, but and they called it now Haida Gwaii, and it was just given over to this one small tribe of who were up into 150 years ago were headhunters, and giving this land and depriving 50% of the population who are non-Indigenous of all their rights. I mean, one day what they're doing is they're going after areas in British Columbia and in Canada where there are not enough people, but they made a mistake recently. They went into a big city near Vancouver called Richmond, and they gave a big chunk of it, 1,000 hectares of developed land, right on a big river, one of the most important rivers in the world, giving it over to a band because they said 150 years ago, we used to fish here for a few summers. And people are waking up, but the people in that particular area are recent Chinese immigrants, many of them poor, living in small apartments, renting in many cases. Already the reaction is significant. The moment they go into where there's a population base, I can tell you the Canadian people will be out in the street. In other words, there's going to be, if this continues, there is going to be armed struggle. I mean, you cannot take away the democratic rights from people who have lived with democracy for hundreds of years. You can't undo 1215 in the Magna Carta. It's in our blood. We have rights. We fought for them. Our ancestors fought for them. Over my dead body. And everybody knows that about me. And Frances, the person there, who's a dear friend, we talked even today, and she's not giving up. She even used the word relentless. And she said at the last protest we were together, it was a couple of weeks ago, where there was 1,000 people surrounding us and trapping us in a building, and where we had to be escorted out in a bus surrounded by police officers. She said, and was filmed doing it, when people are saying it's getting very dangerous, you have to leave, because they want to always get her to leave first, and or then threaten her and then arrest her and carry her away. And she said, I don't care if I die. You don't understand. You don't understand. These are rights. People have a right to know the truth about our past. How dare a university lie to people who pay tens of thousands of dollars, if not 100,000 over 4 years, to go to that institution to be fed these woke lies and communism lies. A lot of the people who are protesting are actually communists. I mean, they're proud of that, and land back people who want to take land back and give it again to this one small race, and who will sell it to the Chinese and somebody else. I mean, it's absolutely wicked and horrible. So what we need enough people who are just not going to bend. And that's why Canada isn't going to lose its way. So as bad as it may appear and as it may make it seem, no, it's just going to go a little bit longer. And then I'm going to look behind me, and there's going to be 1,000 Canadian men and women, and they're going to be saying, excuse me, he's going to speak, or she's going to speak. And I think it's definitely turning. It's definitely turning in schools. I think students are standing up. I mean, it's just going to, all the woke house of cards is just that. It's going to collapse. This is going to be nothing left of it. There's not a single good idea of what we've been visited with in the last 8 years or so in the Western world.
Yeah, I've been thinking about Australia and the woke agenda, that house of cards toppling, because at the moment it seems to me that a lot of we have a horrible trend. I don't know if you've got it in Canada at the moment with our so-called elected parliamentarians, that their staffers are creating really cringe, terrible, awful short form videos for X and TikTok and Facebook and all this stuff. And I'm thinking, who's the target audience? Because people in the audience here on Relentless, and I'd suggest the people that are in your circle, so on and so forth, we look at it, we see through it. It's embarrassing. It's pathetic. We can see the absolute nonsense behind it. So I'm thinking, who's the target audience? And I feel like at the moment they're doing a kind of weeding exercise. They know that we're not going to be paying attention, so we're not the target audience. They know that. So it's the people who don't have two brain cells to rub together. They're trying to, hold on for dear life to keep them interested and involved, so that they can get re-elected and all these sorts of things and continue on with their nonsense. But and particularly, we're only in February, but 2026, I can see that the general public are starting to see through that. And we can see through what's happening in Australia at the moment, after the Bondi massacre, and we've now got the Israeli Prime Minister here and all these sorts of things, that the general public are starting to see through the nonsense. And that's the hope that I hold on to. Because it does get tiring. I can't imagine that being surrounded by hundreds of university students and having to be escorted from a university building or arrested for your safety is a great thing. But I do myself in Australia hold on to that hope and see that that house of cards is slowly falling, because it's one of the mistakes that I think they've made is that they're they're not hiding it. They're open about it, and it's becoming so pathetic. The level of control is now common knowledge, I would suggest, throughout the general public. So that's the hope that I hold on to, that that their openness and willingness to tell everybody is starting to backfire.
Yeah, there's one thing that you mentioned her name. We have a politician in British Columbia, and she's the only one in Canada who has taken a stand against this. I mean, she's against land acknowledgement. She's against special rights for based on ancestry or race. She's against our Constitution. She's against anything that gives one class of people rights over it. She said the name of the party, again, is One BC, because everybody in BC is entitled to the same rights. She's taking it all on, and she's amazing. So she stood up in the legislature in our province, and she said she's against land acknowledgement. She doesn't want them done anymore, and any public institution done, over with. And nobody voted with her. She was all alone. And then a week later, she stood up and she said, I found out all the people in our house in this legislature who own land, which is almost everybody here. So since you all want land acknowledgements, and you're all saying, because again, it's all stolen land, unceded land, I expect then that you're all going to give your land away. You're going to give it back. That you're not going to be a hypocrite. And I think it's kind of interesting, because these people, they're being named. The judges who are making these absurd decisions, because for the last 30 or so years in Canada, maybe 40, we've had these left-wing governments under people like Trudeau, father and son, and they've appointed these lunatic judges who think that, murders, if it's a minority person, that the murder should go to jail for 2 years, whatever type thing. So these crazy people are making these decisions that are stripping people of their fundamental rights, speech, property, and so on. And so what people need to do is they need to name the judges. They need to go to the judges and simply say, if this is how you feel, we need to see if we're losing our land, as people are in parts of British Columbia, because a native group is claiming them. Now, they never own them. They never said they own them up until now, because he also said that nobody owns the land. It's everybody's land. And so now that they're claiming their land, and that the judges should give up their house. And of course, that's happened in Hollywood. I think what happened with Billie Eilish is incredibly important for the whole Western world, that she was so roundly mocked in North America, and people going to her mansion in Los Angeles and saying, okay, if there's nobody illegal on stolen land, we want to stay and live here. We're not illegal on your land. And of course, she sends out her bodyguards and calls the police. But the rank hypocrisy of our leaders, of our cultural icons, call them out. Say, you need to give your land back to the local tribe. And the people in the local tribe who went out to negotiate with her, saying, when are you leaving? We want to claim it back. So just people need to stand up to these clowns who have been getting away. And Canadians are vulnerable, because Canadians, we are probably the politest nation in the world. And there was a film made about us called Canadian Bacon years ago of John Candy. And it was this idea that anytime an American did something bad to us, we go, oh, sorry. American could knock us onto the ground and we go, oh, sorry. And you know what? We're not sorry anymore. That's turning. And the people who are enemy, the people who are doing this to us, are not Indigenous people. The Indigenous people, for the most part, just are men and women who want the best for themselves and their children, and have a good life. And they certainly love the fact that they're living into their 70s and 80s, because they couldn't previously. The problem is our leaders who have drunk this Kool-Aid, and we need to expose them for the hypocrites that they are.
It's funny you talk about that, because again, this morning, there's so many things I've been looking at this morning that are feeding into our conversation. I'm going to screen the share again to X. I just want to read this article, but not the whole thing, obviously, but just very quickly. So this is from Europa.com this morning. So today, the 11th of February 2026, this is in the UK. The Ministry of Justice has ordered the deletion of the UK's largest court reporting archive. So Court Desk, a platform launched to improve media access to magistrates' court data, has been ordered to delete its archive of records by Dr. Lammy's Ministry of Justice. So I won't carry on reading it, but basically, this platform, Court's Desk, enabled the media to go along, and when the court system has hearings or whatever on the weekend, and they don't have time to notify the media, and everything happens so quickly, blah blah blah. Journalists can go along to this platform and find out about it. Supposedly they want to delete it because it was used inappropriately, so on and so forth. I would suggest that a whole load of information is being memory holed, because when people, particularly the media, if anyone's still doing their job properly, can go along and see a whole flurry of things happening at the last minute on the weekend. It might expose, lo and behold, I don't know, rape gangs and all these sorts of things like that. But also your point there about exposing the people who in seats of power. I mean, for instance, using this kind of tool, you'd be able to see which judges, and we all know, in the UK, you can't say anything now without being put in jail for an extended period of time for wrongthink. But you'd be able to identify the judges who are ruling on these cases. I mean, that might be something else as well. They're not just, memory holing people who have been in court, but also the lawyers, the judges, so on and so forth, that are ruling over these cases. I don't know. My conspiracy, allegedly. Just wanted to throw that in.
Well, it's all about erasing the past, and if you're trying to create a brave new world, as Huxley wrote about, or in 1984, or a We, which was the precursor to those books. You really need to have a disconnect. You really need to wipe it all away and say, okay, now we're going to start and we're going to do these things. And people like Winston Smith in 1984 are going to remember. Well, I remember when, I remember the grass was green, and I remember when there were, was a coffee shop here. And I mean, when people that remember the past, remember that it wasn't like this. One day soon those people are going to be gone. And it'll be a rootless society. And that's what talking about Hitler and the National Socialism in Nazi Germany, that they wanted complete erasure from the past, because the German past was one to be proud of. It was parliamentary, it was rich in culture, it was, we've seen this time and again. Look at the Cultural Revolution in 65 to 75 in China. They turned, young people against their parents, against their teachers, these struggle sessions. They just wanted to make it seem as though nothing good happened in the past. But it's awful. I hope the British Prime Minister loses his job. There's pressure on him now, because people in his own party are recognizing what he's doing to the country. I just want to, I know time is short. I just want to make another point before go here. And that is that people like to say that, that social media is bad. And there's been our previous Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, the only bills and acts that he created were towards censorship of social media. I mean, he wasn't creating legislation in other areas. This was going to be his legacy. He didn't want to be racist or this. Essentially, he didn't want anybody thinking or speaking. So what we have to do is recognize how important people like you are, Robin. I mean, there are lots of teachers and other people around there who you could have get on your show who'd say what I'm saying, but there are not many people like you who are putting together quality productions and getting it out to people. I mean, without social media, we're doomed, because we won't call them mainstream media, whatever you want to call them, corporate media, leftist media. I mean, they failed us.
Yeah.
And so what I'm going to do on my dying days, looking back at life, I'm going to be going what really changed the world for the better wasn't, I like to think, people like me had a small role to play. But I think it's the people in social media. I think it's the people who gave us voice. You called me a teacher. I call myself a teacher, even though I can't be in a classroom. But you're a teacher, and I just love the fact that you take interest in other people on social media, and they've taken me from being a disgraced, fired teacher into a force. And I know I'm a force because sometimes I post that 1 million people see, and I mean, most of my posts bomb, but some really have an impact, and so for me, I just want you to know, and it's twice now you've had me on your show, how grateful I am to you.
Grateful that you joined me, Jim, because anybody that can stand up in whatever form it might be, I admire greatly. And I appreciate your compliments. Maybe one thing we've never talked about is prior to the COVID war, I was a teacher as well. So that's probably I know I've talked about this with a few other people, that those skills that I learned throughout my career have aided me greatly doing what I do now, which I'd suggest probably is very similar for you. But oh, look, the corporate media, I was actually thinking about that the other day, that, not only are we bombarded with information because of social media, which, it can be negative. People talk about having, they have to have a timeout and all this sort of stuff because it's just too much. There's things coming at us all the time. But it's actually a huge gift, because if you think, I think back to when I was a child, and my parents were watchers of the ABC, and for everybody in Australia knows that that's funded by the taxpayer, and the government hands over our money, and it's full of woke nonsense. 20 years ago, that's all we were hearing from. There was no opportunity for any other voice, anything like that. So, as much as people want to complain about social media, and yes, it's good to have time out, I think it is a blessing, because otherwise we'd still be in the dark ages as far as information about these 3-letter agencies, bureaucrats, politicians, all these sorts of things. So, and being able to communicate with each other across continents is amazing. So no wonder Turdo wanted to leave his legacy of censorship, because heaven forbid that people like you and me actually are able to speak to each other and have an audience that hear you speak as well. Jeez. Honestly. I do appreciate your time, Jim. Do you have... I'll just pop up on the stage once more before we leave. Everybody, please go along to Jim on X, and Jim's website is also in the description. It's on the bottom of your screen, and that is Jim's book there, The Scarlet Lesson. Do you have a parting message for the audience before we finish the show?
No, just maybe a quote. I probably said it last time, from Burke: all it takes for the triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing. I think it's important that we do something. Not everybody can afford to lose their job and be beat up, as I've been for years. I mean, that people can find a way to be relentless and to show the courage of their convictions. Thank you once again, Robin.
Thank you. All righty, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your comments, and everybody on the replay as well. Make sure you do stay relentless, and thanks, Jim. Such a pleasure to speak to you again, and we'll see you all later. Bye, everyone.
Relentless in our fields, we hunt the hidden flaw. masters of the craft, we shatter systems' walls. Relentless.